Hello, this is David from DN Cognitive Counseling. As you know, I've referenced the book White Fragility, and I wanted to go through a little bit of a critique and actually to show you how difficult it is to get through this book. And what I mean by that is that if the premises of an argument are untrue, then everything about that argument has to be untrue. In other words, if I say to you that I have a substance, that its elements are created by X, Y, and Z, and then I'm able to show you that X, Y, and Z are not true, then that substance can't be made out of that, and everything I just said to you can't be true. So I'm going to start off on the author's note of the book, and we're only going to do the first page, because in the first page, and going line by line, I'm going to be able to show you how bad this book is in dealing in reality and with facts. So the book starts out, the United States was founded on the principle that all people are created equal. That is absolutely true. That is one part of the book I cannot disagree with, absolutely true. So the first sentence of the book I could definitely agree with. Let's go to the second sentence. Yet the nation began with the attempted genocide of the indigenous people and the theft of their land. So, we already have a claim being made. Now, what happened with the Native Americans in this country, and there was a lot of brutalization, a lot of horror, but the nature of a genocide that took place is a statement that she makes of fact. So, I decided let's go to a place where we like to look at facts. This is from the History Network, Article 7302. On September 21st, the National Museum of the American Indian will open its doors. In an interview this year, the museum founding director, William Richard West, declared that the new institution would not shy away from such difficult subjects as the effort to eradicate American Indian culture in the 19th and 20th centuries. It is a safe bet that someone will also inevitably raise the issue of genocide. Okay? So the article's automatically acknowledging that. The story of the encounter between European settlers and the American native population does not make for pleasant reading. Among early accounts, perhaps the most famous is Helen Hunt Jackson, A Century of Dishonor, a doleful recitation of forced removals, killings, and callous disregard. Jackson's book, which clearly captures some essential elements of what happened, also sets a pattern of exaggerations and one-sided indictment that has persisted to this day. So, to understand what the author is saying here is that this book, which presented absolutely true facts, was not a full picture and an indictment of a small area. Thus, according to Ward Churchill, a professor of ethics studies at the University of Colorado, the reduction of the North American Indian population from an estimated 12 million in 1500 to barely 237,000 in 1900 represents a vast genocide, the most sustained on record. By the end of the 19th century, writer David E. Stannard, a historian at the University of Hawaii, Native Americans had undergone the worst human holocaust the world has ever witnessed, roaring across 2 continents, non-stop for 4 centuries and consuming the lives of countless tens of millions of people. In the judgment of Lenore A. Sturfrum and Phil Lane Jr., there can be no more monumental example of sustained genocide. Certainly none involving a race of people as broad and complex as this anywhere in the annals of human history. The sweeping charge of genocide against the Indians became especially popular during the Vietnam War, when historians opposed to the conflict began drawing parallels between our action in Southeast Asia and early examples of supposedly ingrained American viciousness towards non-white people. The historian Richard Derian, referring to the troops under the command of the Indian scout Kit Carson, called them forerunners of the burning 5th Marines who set fires to the Vietnamese villages, while the American Indian, the first victim. J. David urged contemporary readers to recall how American civilization had originated in theft and murder and efforts towards genocide. Further accusations of genocide marked the run-up to the 1992 quintessary of the landing of Columbus on the National Council of Churches, adopted a resolution branding the event an invasion that resulted in the slavery and genocide of the native people. In a widely read book, The Conquest of Paradise, 1990, Kirkpatrick Sale charged that the English and their American successors were pursuing a policy of extermination that had continued unabated for 4 centuries. Later works have followed suit. In 1999, Encyclopedia of Genocide, edited by the scholar Israel Shardy, an article by Ward Churchill, argues the extermination was the express objective of the U.S. government. To the Cambodian expert Ben Kirian, similarly, genocide is the only appropriate way to describe how white settlers treated the Indians and so forth. The American Indians suffered horribly is indisputable, but whether their suffering amounts to a Holocaust or a genocide is another matter. So in other words, this is not a statement of fact, but people's opinions based upon something they're pushing. It is firmly established fact that a mere 250,000 Native Americans were still alive in the territory of the United States at the end of the 19th century. Still, in scholarly contention, however, is the number of Indians alive at the time at first contact with Europeans. Some students of the subject speak of an inflated number game. Others charge the size of the Aboriginal population has been deliberately minimized in order to make the decline seem less severe than it was. The disparity in estimates is enormous. In 1928, the ethnologist James Mooney proposed the total count was 1,152,950 Indians in all the tribal areas of North Mexico at the time of the European arrival. By 1987, the American Indian Holocaust and Survival, Russell Thornton was giving the figure as well as over 5 million, nearly 5 times as high as Mooney. While Lenore Stifford and Phil Lane Jr. suggest a total of 12 million. The figure rests in turn on the work of the anthropologist Henry Dahms, who in 1983 had estimated the Aboriginal population of North America as a whole at 18 million, and the present territory of the United States is about 10. From one perspective, these differences, however startling, may seem beside the point. There's ample evidence, after all, that the arrival of the white man triggered a drastic reduction in the number of Native Americans. Nevertheless, even if the high figures are credited, they alone do not prove the occurrence of genocide. To address the issue properly, we must begin with the most important reason for the Indians' catastrophic decline, namely, the spread of highly contagious diseases to which they had no immunity. This phenomenon is known by scholars as the virgin soil epidemic in North America. It was the norm. The most lethal of the pathogens introduced by the Europeans was smallpox, which sometimes incapacitated so many adults at once that death from hunger and starvation ran as high as death from diseases. In several cases, entire tribes rendered extinct. Other killers included measles, influenza, whooping cough, dysphoria, typhus, bubonic plague, cholera, and scarlet fever. Although syphilis wasn't apparently native to the parts of the Western Hemisphere, it too was probably introduced into North America by the Europeans. By the way, that's an STD, so you understand how that was introduced. After all this, there was no essential disagreement. The most hideous enemy of the Native Americans was not white man and his weaponry, concluded by Alfred Crosby, but the invisible killers, which those men brought in their blood and breath. It is thought that between 75 to 90% of all Indian deaths resulted from these killers. To some, however, this is enough in itself to warrant the term genocide. Now again, I'm not going to go through the rest of the article, but you could see, just on the second sentence of this book, stating as a statement of fact that the American was founded on this form of genocide is actually something that's not true, or potentially something you could argue is not being true. Meaning, depending on how now you want to define genocide and what caused it. So, we see again that from the first sentence, which again I have no problem with, already the second sentence is really the first problem and something that has no basis in reality. The third sentence. America's wealth was built on the labor of kidnapped and enslaved Africans and their descendants. Now, there's no question that the South and North benefited from slavery. So the aspect of stating that wealth was built due to slavery, it's very difficult to make an argument and say that's not true. Women were denied the right to vote until 1920, and black women were denied the right and access until 1965. Again, now this is the fourth sentence in the book. And again, a statement that is not true. So let's go to this article right here. So you can see this. Okay, here we go. This is from the npc.gov articles, Black Women and Their Fight for Voting Rights. And I'm not going to go through the entire article again. But in Boston, black reformers like Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, Charlotte Fortin Krimke found the National Association of Colored Women in 1896. During the meeting at Charles Street Meeting House, members discussed ways of attaining civil rights and the women's suffrage. The NACW's motto, "Lifting as we climb," reflecting the organization's goal to uplift the status of black women in 1913. Ida B. Wells, founder of the Alpha Suffrage Club of Chicago, the nation's first black women's club, focused specifically on suffrage. After the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, black women voted in elections and held political offices. Now again, according to Miss DiAngelo, black women didn't get the right to vote till 1965. But that's factually, again, not true. Black women not only got to vote in 1920, but held office. So this is the fourth sentence. And already in 4 sentences, factual things that are incomplete and wrong in a book. Now, when you start off a book, and in the first 4 sentences of your author's note, you have factual things that are wrong, I want to ask you, if we go through this book line by line, how many more things do you think I'm going to find wrong? And by the way, I've read the book. So that is a rhetorical question. But again, this is just statements of fact that she makes. Sadly, the term identity politics refers to the focus on the barrier specific groups face in their struggle for equality, yet have yet to achieve our founding principles. But any gain we have made thus far have come through identity politics. Okay. Again, understand what you just said, that the only way that people have gone ahead and made any improvement has been through identity politics. I'm just going to read a little bit further and then I'm going to destroy that idea too. The identities of those sitting at the table of power in this country have remained markedly similar. White male, middle and upper class able bodies, acknowledging their fact may be dismissed as political correctness, but it is still a fact. The decisions made at those tables affect the lives of those not at the tables. Exclusion by those at the table doesn't depend on willful intent. We don't have to intend to exclude for the result of our actions to be exclusion. While implicit bias is always at play because all humans have bias, inequity can occur simply through homogeneity. If I am not aware of a barrier you face, then I won't see them, much less be motivated to remove them. More will I be motivated to remove the barriers if they provide an advantage to which I feel entitled. Now, everything you just heard was an assertion of belief. Now, there are certain elements of that I think I actually agree with in terms of the way that society works and functions. There are certain elements of that are much more nuanced and problematic. The problem is it's being asserted as a statement of fact with no aspect of nuance. And worse off, as you heard, there was never any sort of improvement without identity politics. Now, let's go back to the abolitionist movement. Now, the abolitionist movement was around for a very long time. It was a movement, as it says here on the History Channel, that was an organized effort to end the practice of slavery in the United States. The first leaders of the campaign, which took place from about 1830 to 1870, mimicked some of the same tactics British abolitionists had used to end slavery in Great Britain in the 1830s. Though it started as a movement with religious underpinnings, abolitionists became a controversial political issue that divided much of the country. supporters and critics often engage in heated debates and violently and even deadly confrontations. Now, what were the people's color that did this? Who are they? The divisiveness and almost fueled by a movement, along with other factors, led to the Civil War and ultimately the end of slavery. What is an abolitionist? An abolitionist, the name implies, is a person who sought to abolish slavery during the 19th century. More specifically, these individuals sought the immediate and full emancipation of all slaves. Most early abolitionists were white, religious Americans. But some were prominent leaders of the movement were also black men and women who had escaped from bondage. Again, most of the early abolitionists were white, religious Americans. I'm sorry, Miss DiAngelo. What do you mean that the only time that we've ever had any sort of advancement has only been through identity politics? The abolitionist movement had nothing to do with identity politics. It had to do with a religious belief system in entering a practice that they believed to be wrong. On your first page, your forward page, fact after fact, which could be argued as wrong. This is not good scholarship. This is not somebody who did their research to understand the nature of a book. This is somebody who has an agenda, and that agenda is being pushed without really understanding any nuance or any understanding. There's no question what happened to the Native Americans was horrific. No question. To call it a genocide and to blow it out of proportion, again, there's a reason why. There's no question slavery was wrong. But to state that the only way that anybody has ever been able to gain anything is through identity politics, that is also factually untrue. And what were the color of the people who were the major force of the abolitionist movement? They were white and religious people. People that had a fundamentally different belief than the other white people that believed in slavery. Meaning white wasn't monolithic back then. The idea of calling a book White Fragility with no understanding of history, no aspect of trying to understand how things came about, what things are built upon, but basically you have a singular point of view. You have taken certain people's exaggerations, as you saw from the historical argument, and then grab with it as that's the fact. And now you make a basis of that for the foundational argument. Now, again, I'm going to leave this at this point right now. We've done one page. I want you to think about how many facts on that one page I was able to show as a problem. One page, white fragility. And again, it gets much, much worse. I hope that you like this video. I hope that you'll share this with other people. I hope that you will subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you like, you can become a patron by going to the Subcribe-star link. And I wish you a good night and good mental health.